Summary of Boundaries: When to Say Yes, How to Say No to Take Control of Your Life by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Chapter 1: A Day in a Boundaryless Life. The first chapter introduces Sherry, a woman overwhelmed by her inability to set boundaries in her life. The narrative details her typical day, highlighting how she constantly sacrifices her own needs and desires to meet the demands of others. From the moment she wakes up, Sherry is engulfed by a sense of dread and anxiety, knowing that her day will be filled with obligations and challenges that she feels powerless to control. Sherry's day begins with her worrying about her son Todd's behavioral issues, which she struggles to address both at home and at school. Despite her best intentions, Todd's defiance and lack of discipline weigh heavily on her, leading to a sense of helplessness. Her morning routine is chaotic, as she rushes to prepare breakfast, pack lunches, and finish her daughter Amy's costume, all while managing her own stress and guilt for not being able to do it all perfectly. At work, Sherry faces additional stress from her boss, Jeff Moreland, who frequently unloads last-minute tasks onto her. Although Sherry is aware that Jeff's demands are unreasonable, she feels compelled to comply, fearing the consequences of saying no. This pattern of overcommitment extends to her personal relationships as well. Sherry is often the go-to person for her high-strung friend Lois, who constantly needs support but offers none in return. Sherry's inability to set boundaries with Lois leaves her feeling resentful and drained. The chapter also delves into Sherry's strained marriage with Walt. Once a source of strength, their relationship has deteriorated into a parent-child dynamic, with Sherry feeling increasingly controlled and isolated. Walt's temper and lack of emotional support further erode Sherry's sense of self-worth, yet she continues to placate him in an attempt to maintain peace. As the day progresses, Sherry's attempts to juggle her responsibilities only lead to more frustration. She agrees to take on additional tasks for the church retreat, despite her longing for some personal time. By the end of the day, Sherry is physically and emotionally exhausted, yet she finds herself unable to confront her husband about their marital issues, choosing instead to avoid conflict and retreat into her own thoughts. The chapter concludes with Sherry feeling hopeless and questioning the promises of joy and fulfillment that her faith offers. She reads a passage from the Bible, seeking comfort, but instead feels abandoned by God. Her tears reflect the deep spiritual and emotional pain she experiences from living a life without boundaries. Analysis and Introduction to Boundaries. The authors use Sherry's story to illustrate the destructive effects of a boundaryless life. Sherry's inability to set limits for herself and others results in a life that is out of control, filled with frustration, resentment, and a sense of helplessness. The chapter introduces the concept of boundaries as a solution to these problems, emphasizing the importance of taking ownership of one's life and responsibilities. The narrative sets the stage for the rest of the book, which will explore the concept of boundaries in depth. The authors suggest that many of the issues Sherry faces, overcommitment, fear of conflict, people-pleasing, and taking on responsibilities that don't belong to her, stem from a lack of clear boundaries. These issues are common in many people's lives, particularly those who struggle to say no or feel responsible for the happiness and well-being of others. The chapter raises critical questions that the book will address. How can one set limits and still be a loving person? What are legitimate boundaries, and how can they be maintained without guilt or fear? The authors propose that understanding and implementing boundaries are essential for a healthy, balanced life. Through Sherry's story, readers are introduced to the painful reality of living without boundaries and are encouraged to consider how setting limits can lead to greater control, peace, and fulfillment in their own lives. Chapter 2: What does a boundary look like? In this chapter, the concept of boundaries is further explored through the story of Bill, a 25-year-old man whose life is spiraling out of control due to drug use and irresponsibility. Bill's parents come to the author seeking help to fix their son. However, the authors shift the focus, explaining that the real problem lies not with Bill but with his parents, who have failed to establish clear boundaries with him. They have been taking on his responsibilities, shielding him from the consequences of his actions, and as a result, Bill has no motivation to change. The authors explain that boundaries are like invisible property lines that define where one person ends and another begins. In the physical world, boundaries are easy to see: fences, walls, and signs mark where one's property starts and ends. In the emotional and spiritual world, boundaries are just as real, but they are harder to see. These boundaries help individuals take ownership of their lives, distinguishing what is their responsibility and what is not. Key concepts of boundaries. 1. Me and not me. Boundaries define who you are and who you are not. They help you take ownership of your life and responsibilities, giving you freedom and options. Without clear boundaries, individuals may end up taking on responsibilities that do not belong to them, leading to burnout and resentment. 2 and 4. The Bible teaches that we are responsible to others, but not for them. This distinction is crucial. While we should help others with burdens that are too heavy for them to bear alone, we are not responsible for carrying their daily loads. Each person must take responsibility for their own life, feelings, attitudes, and behaviors. 3. Good in, bad out. Boundaries help us protect what is good in our lives and keep out what is harmful. They act as filters, allowing us to let in positive influences and keep out negative ones. This concept also applies to emotional boundaries, letting out the bad, like pain or sin, and letting in the good, like love and support. 4. God and boundaries. The concept of boundaries originates from the very nature of God, who defines himself as a distinct being with his own personality, desires, and boundaries. God sets limits on what he allows into his presence, and establishes clear boundaries in his relationship with humanity. Just as God respects boundaries, so should we in our relationships with others. The authors provide several examples of boundaries in everyday life. Skin. The physical boundary of our skin is the most basic form, protecting us from harm and keeping us separate from others. Victims of physical or sexual abuse often struggle with boundaries because their basic physical boundaries were violated. Words. Saying no is a powerful way to set boundaries. Words define where we stand, what we will or will not tolerate, and help others understand our limits. The Bible emphasizes the importance of clear communication in setting boundaries. Truth. Knowing and accepting the truth about ourselves and others helps us establish boundaries. Understanding God's truth provides a foundation for healthy boundaries, preventing us from living in denial or being controlled by others. Geographical distance. Sometimes, physical separation is necessary to maintain boundaries, especially in situations where there is abuse or ongoing harm. Distance can give individuals the space they need to heal and regain control over their lives. Time. Taking time for oneself or stepping away from a situation temporarily can help restore boundaries that have been eroded. This is particularly important for those who have never separated emotionally or spiritually from controlling relationships. Emotional distance. Similar to physical distance, emotional distance allows individuals to protect their hearts and minds. This is especially necessary in abusive relationships, where emotional boundaries have been repeatedly violated. Other people. Support from others is essential in maintaining boundaries. Isolation can make it difficult to stand firm, but with the help of supportive friends, family, or a church community, individuals can find the strength to set and maintain boundaries. Consequences. Boundaries must be backed up with consequences. Just as trespassing on someone's property has legal consequences, violating personal boundaries should result in appropriate actions to reinforce those limits. Consequences teach others to respect boundaries and demonstrate the seriousness of maintaining them. What's within my boundaries? The chapter concludes with a discussion on what falls within personal boundaries, what individuals are responsible for. This includes feelings. Emotions are personal and must be acknowledged and managed responsibly. They should not dictate actions but should be understood as indicators of deeper issues that need to be addressed. Attitudes and beliefs. Individuals must take responsibility for their attitudes and beliefs, which influence their behavior and relationships. These are shaped early in life but can be changed through self-awareness and effort. Behaviors. Actions have consequences, and individuals must own their behavior. Failing to do so can lead to destructive patterns, as seen in the example of Bill. Choices. Each person is responsible for their choices and must accept the consequences. Blaming others for personal decisions is a sign of poor boundaries. Values. What individuals value guides their decisions and behavior. Recognizing and taking responsibility for one's values is key to establishing healthy boundaries. Limits. Setting limits on others' behavior toward us is essential for protecting our well-being. While we cannot control others, we can control how much exposure we allow to harmful behaviors. Chapter 3. Boundary Problems. This chapter delves into the different types of boundary problems people experience. The authors categorize these issues into 4 main types. 1. Compliance. These individuals have trouble saying no to others. They often feel guilty or afraid of hurting others' feelings, so they end up doing things they don't want to do. Compliance often lack clear boundaries and let others dictate their lives, leading to resentment and burnout. 2. Avoidance. Avoidants have the opposite problem. They struggle to say yes to help from others. They are reluctant to open up or admit they need support, often due to a fear of vulnerability or a belief that they should be self-sufficient. This leads to isolation and a lack of meaningful connections. 3. Controllers. Controllers are people who violate others' boundaries, often without realizing it. They tend to manipulate or pressure others into doing what they want, not respecting the limits or autonomy of those around them. Controllers can be aggressive, using force or intimidation, or manipulative, using guilt or charm to get their way. 4. Non-responsives. Non-responsives fail to recognize their responsibility to respond to the needs of others. They may be so focused on their own needs that they overlook or dismiss the needs of those around them. This often results in strained relationships and feelings of neglect from those who are close to them. The authors explain that these boundary problems often stem from a combination of personal tendencies and learned behaviors. Family dynamics, cultural expectations, and past experiences all play a role in shaping how individuals approach boundaries. The chapter emphasizes the importance of self-awareness in identifying and addressing these issues. The authors also discuss how these boundary problems can interact in relationships, creating dysfunctional patterns. For example, a compliant might end up in a relationship with a controller, leading to an imbalance where one person consistently sacrifices their needs for the other. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for developing healthier boundaries and improving relationships. Chapter 4. How Boundaries Are Developed. This chapter explores the process of boundary development, emphasizing that boundaries are learned over time. The authors outline 6 key stages in the development of boundaries. 1. Bonding. The first stage of boundary development occurs in infancy, where bonding with caregivers is crucial. This stage establishes a foundation of trust and security, allowing the child to explore the world while feeling safe. When bonding is healthy, it sets the stage for the development of healthy boundaries. 2. Separation and individuation. As children grow, they begin to distinguish themselves from their caregivers, developing a sense of individuality. This stage is marked by the child's first attempts to assert independence, such as saying no or expressing preferences. Healthy boundaries start to form as children learn to balance dependence with independence. 3. Hatching. Around the age of 5 months, children begin to become more aware of the world around them and start to explore it. This phase is characterized by curiosity and a desire to engage with the environment. The development of boundaries is supported as children learn to navigate this exploration within safe limits. 4. Practicing. During the toddler years, children become more active in testing boundaries. They start to walk, talk, and assert themselves more forcefully. This stage is essential for children to learn where their limits are and how to respect the boundaries of others. 5. Rapprochement. Around 18 to 36 months, children start to realize that they are separate individuals from their caregivers. This realization can be frightening, leading to a need for reassurance and connection. Healthy boundaries are reinforced as children learn that they can be separate yet still connected to others. 6. Adolescence. The final stage in boundary development occurs during adolescence, where the individual continues to assert independence while forming a clearer sense of identity. This stage involves testing and renegotiating boundaries with parents, peers, and society. Healthy boundaries are crucial for navigating this complex period. The chapter emphasizes that boundary development is not a linear process. Setbacks and challenges are common. However, understanding these stages can help individuals and parents recognize where boundary issues may have arisen and how to address them. Chapter 5. 10 Laws of Boundaries. This chapter introduces the 10 laws, or principles that govern boundaries. These laws are essential for understanding how boundaries function and how to maintain them effectively. 1. The law of sowing and reaping. This law emphasizes that actions have consequences. When boundaries are ignored, the natural consequences will follow, whether positive or negative. Respecting boundaries ensures that individuals face the appropriate outcomes of their actions. 2. The law of responsibility. Individuals are responsible for their own lives, but they are also responsible to others in terms of support and care. This law distinguishes between taking responsibility for oneself and being responsible to others. 3. The law of power. People have the power to take control of their lives, set boundaries, and change their behavior. This law encourages individuals to recognize their own agency in making changes and setting limits. 4. The law of respect. To have your boundaries respected, you must respect the boundaries of others. This mutual respect is crucial for healthy relationships and effective boundary setting. 5. The law of motivation. Motivation for setting boundaries should come from a place of self-care and respect, not fear or guilt. Understanding the reasons behind boundary setting is important for maintaining them. 6. The law of evaluation. Setting boundaries involves evaluating how they affect others. While boundaries may cause discomfort, they should ultimately be beneficial and lead to healthier relationships. 7. The law of proactivity. This law encourages individuals to set boundaries proactively, rather than reacting to violations after they occur. Proactive boundary setting helps prevent issues before they arise. 8. The law of envy. Envy often arises from a lack of boundaries. Individuals who do not set boundaries may feel envious of those who do. Recognizing and addressing envy can help individuals focus on their own boundaries. 9. The law of activity. Boundaries require active effort to maintain. This law emphasizes the importance of taking action to set and uphold boundaries, rather than passively allowing them to be violated. 10. The law of exposure. Boundaries must be communicated clearly to others. This law highlights the importance of making boundaries visible and explicit, ensuring that others are aware of them. Chapter 6. Common Boundary Myths. This chapter addresses common myths and misconceptions about boundaries that often prevent people from setting or maintaining them. The authors debunk these myths, offering clarity and guidance. Myth 1. If I set boundaries, I'm being selfish. Many people believe that setting boundaries is selfish, but the authors argue that boundaries are necessary for self-care and healthy relationships. Setting boundaries allows individuals to give freely without resentment. Myth 2. Boundaries are a sign of disobedience. Some believe that setting boundaries, especially in hierarchical relationships like parent-child or employer-employee, is a form of disobedience. However, the authors explain that boundaries are a sign of maturity and responsibility, not rebellion. Myth 3. If I begin setting boundaries, I will be hurt by others. Fear of retaliation or rejection often prevents people from setting boundaries. The authors acknowledge that boundary setting can be challenging but argue that it ultimately leads to healthier relationships and greater self-respect. Myth 4. If I set boundaries, I will hurt others. People often worry that setting boundaries will harm their relationships or cause others pain. The authors emphasize that while boundaries may cause discomfort, they are necessary for long-term relational health. Myth 5. Boundaries mean I am angry. While boundaries can be set in response to anger, they are not inherently an expression of anger. Instead, boundaries are a way to protect oneself and maintain healthy interactions. Myth 6. When others set boundaries, it injures me. Some individuals feel hurt or rejected when others set boundaries. The authors explain that boundaries are not meant to harm but to create clear and respectful interactions. Myth 7. Boundaries cause feelings of guilt. Guilt is a common emotion when setting boundaries, especially for those who are used to pleasing others. The authors encourage readers to recognize this guilt as a sign that boundaries are needed, not something to be avoided. Myth 8. Boundaries are permanent, and I'm afraid of burning my bridges. Boundaries can change over time and are not necessarily permanent. The authors explain that boundaries can be adjusted as relationships evolve and circumstances change. Chapter 7. Boundaries and your family. This chapter focuses on the complex dynamics of setting boundaries within the family. The authors explore the challenges of establishing boundaries with parents, siblings, and extended family members. They emphasize that family relationships are often the most difficult to navigate when it comes to boundaries because of deep-rooted patterns and expectations. Boundaries with parents. The authors explain that many adults struggle to set boundaries with their parents, often due to a sense of obligation, guilt, or fear of rejection. They emphasize the importance of establishing clear boundaries to transition from a child-parent relationship to an adult-adult relationship. Boundaries with siblings. Sibling relationships can also be challenging, especially when rivalry, competition, or unresolved childhood issues are involved. The authors encourage open communication and mutual respect as key components in setting boundaries with siblings. Boundaries with extended family. Extended family members, such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, can sometimes overstep boundaries, particularly when they hold strong opinions about family matters. The authors advise setting limits on how much influence extended family members have on one's life and decisions. The chapter also discusses the importance of creating a healthy leaving and cleaving process in marriage, where couples establish boundaries that prioritize their new family unit over their families of origin. This process helps couples form a strong, independent identity and avoid conflicts that can arise from external interference. Chapter 8: Boundaries and Your Friends. This chapter addresses the importance of boundaries in friendships. The authors discuss how friendship, while valuable, can sometimes blur boundaries due to the close emotional connection involved. The chapter highlights several key points. Balancing giving and receiving. Healthy friendships are based on mutual give and take. The authors stress the importance of ensuring that both parties contribute to the relationship and that one person is not consistently taking on the other's burdens. Confronting issues. When conflicts or issues arise in friendships, setting boundaries is crucial. The authors encourage addressing problems directly and honestly, rather than avoiding them or letting them fester. This helps prevent resentment and maintains the integrity of the relationship. Avoiding enmeshment. Enmeshment occurs when boundaries between friends become blurred, leading to a loss of individual identity. The authors caution against over-involvement in each other's lives and emphasize the need for personal space and independence. Dealing with manipulation. Some friends may use guilt, manipulation, or emotional pressure to violate boundaries. The authors advise recognizing these behaviors and responding with clear, firm boundaries to protect oneself. The chapter also explores the concept of toxic friendships, relationships that consistently drain energy, cause stress, or involve one-sided dependency. The authors recommend reevaluating such friendships and, if necessary, setting firm boundaries or even ending the relationship for the sake of personal well-being. Chapter 9: Boundaries and Your Spouse. In this chapter, the authors explore the complexities of setting boundaries within marriage. They emphasize that healthy boundaries are essential for maintaining a strong, balanced relationship where both partners feel respected and valued. The chapter addresses several key issues. Individuation in marriage. While marriage involves a deep connection between partners, it is also important for each person to maintain a sense of individuality. The authors stress the importance of setting boundaries that allow for personal growth, interests, and space within the marriage. Dealing with control issues. Control can be a significant issue in marriages, where one partner may try to dominate or manipulate the other. The authors discuss how setting boundaries can prevent control dynamics from damaging the relationship. This includes saying no to unreasonable demands and asserting one's own needs and desires. Balancing intimacy and independence. The authors explore the balance between closeness and independence in marriage. They emphasize that while emotional and physical intimacy are crucial, maintaining a degree of independence is equally important for a healthy relationship. This involves setting boundaries around personal time, space, and activities. Addressing marital conflicts. Conflict is inevitable in any marriage, but how couples handle it can either strengthen or weaken the relationship. The authors encourage setting boundaries that promote constructive conflict resolution, such as avoiding hurtful language, respecting each other's perspectives, and agreeing on healthy ways to disagree. Boundaries and sexuality. The chapter also touches on the importance of boundaries in the sexual aspect of marriage. This includes respecting each other's boundaries regarding physical affection, understanding and addressing each other's needs, and maintaining mutual consent and respect. The authors conclude the chapter by emphasizing that setting boundaries in marriage is not about building walls but about creating a safe and respectful environment where both partners can thrive. They encourage couples to work together in establishing boundaries that enhance their relationship. Chapter 10: Boundaries and Your Children. This chapter focuses on the role of boundaries in parenting. The authors explain that setting and enforcing boundaries with children is crucial for their development into responsible, self-disciplined adults. The chapter covers several important aspects of parenting with boundaries. Teaching responsibility. Boundaries help children learn that actions have consequences. The authors emphasize the importance of allowing children to experience the natural consequences of their behavior, rather than shielding them from discomfort. This helps them understand responsibility and develop self-control. Balancing love and limits. Parenting requires a balance between showing love and setting limits. The authors discuss the importance of providing both nurturing support and clear boundaries. Overprotectiveness can hinder a child's development, while too much strictness can lead to rebellion. The key is to provide guidance that is both firm and compassionate. Encouraging autonomy. As children grow, they need to gradually take on more responsibility and make their own decisions. The authors stress the importance of gradually expanding boundaries as children mature, allowing them to develop autonomy while still providing appropriate guidance. Dealing with defiance. When children resist boundaries, it's important for parents to remain consistent and not give in to tantrums or manipulative behavior. The authors advise parents to enforce consequences calmly and firmly, without anger or frustration. Fostering healthy relationships. Boundaries help children learn to respect others' boundaries and develop healthy relationships. The authors encourage parents to model good boundary setting in their own relationships, as children often learn by example. Preventing enmeshment. The chapter also discusses the risk of enmeshment, where parents and children become overly dependent on each other, leading to a lack of individuality. The authors emphasize the need for parents to encourage independence while maintaining a loving connection. The chapter concludes with practical advice for implementing boundaries with children at different stages of development, from toddlers to teenagers. The authors remind parents that setting boundaries is an ongoing process that requires patience, consistency, and love. Chapter 11: Boundaries and Work. This chapter addresses the importance of boundaries in the workplace. The authors explore the challenges of maintaining a healthy work-life balance and setting boundaries with colleagues, supervisors, and subordinates. The chapter highlights several key points. Work-life balance. The authors emphasize the importance of setting boundaries between work and personal life. Overworking can lead to burnout, stress, and strained relationships. Setting clear limits on work hours and responsibilities is essential for maintaining overall well-being. Saying no at work. Many people struggle to say no to additional tasks or responsibilities at work, fearing they will be seen as uncooperative or lazy. The authors encourage readers to recognize their limits and say no when necessary, explaining that overcommitting can lead to decreased productivity and job satisfaction. Dealing with difficult colleagues. The workplace often involves interactions with difficult or demanding colleagues. The authors advise setting boundaries to protect oneself from manipulation, overwork, or toxic behavior. This may involve clear communication, assertiveness, and, when necessary, involving HR or management. Managing expectations. The authors discuss the importance of managing others' expectations in the workplace. This includes setting realistic goals, communicating effectively, and not allowing oneself to be taken advantage of by colleagues or supervisors who may push for more than what is reasonable. Boundaries with supervisors. Setting boundaries with supervisors can be challenging, especially when there is a power dynamic involved. The authors advise clear and respectful communication, as well as knowing when to stand firm on boundaries to avoid being overwhelmed by excessive demands. Boundaries with subordinates. For those in leadership positions, setting boundaries with subordinates is crucial to maintaining authority and respect. The authors emphasize the importance of being fair but firm, providing clear guidelines and expectations while also respecting employees' boundaries. The chapter concludes with a discussion on the importance of integrity and maintaining ethical boundaries in the workplace. The authors encourage readers to uphold their values and boundaries, even when faced with pressure or temptation to compromise. Chapter 12: Boundaries and Yourself. In this chapter, the authors explore the concept of setting boundaries with oneself. They emphasize that self-discipline and self-care are essential components of a healthy life, and boundaries play a crucial role in these areas. The chapter covers the following key topics. Self-control. The authors explain that self-control is a form of boundary setting with oneself. It involves regulating one's behavior, emotions, and impulses to align with personal goals and values. Developing self-control is essential for achieving long-term success and well-being. Self-care. Boundaries are also important for ensuring that one's own needs are met. The authors discuss the importance of prioritizing self-care, including physical, emotional, and spiritual health. This involves setting aside time for rest, relaxation, and activities that bring joy and fulfillment. Dealing with inner critic. Many people struggle with an inner critic that undermines their self-esteem and confidence. The authors encourage setting boundaries with this inner voice, challenging negative self-talk, and replacing it with positive affirmations and constructive thoughts. Setting goals. The authors emphasize the importance of setting personal goals and creating boundaries that support their achievement. This includes setting limits on distractions, managing time effectively, and staying focused on what is truly important. Handling failure. Boundaries with oneself also involve handling failure and setbacks with grace. The authors encourage readers to learn from mistakes, forgive themselves, and move forward without dwelling on the past. Developing healthy habits. The chapter discusses the role of boundaries in developing and maintaining healthy habits. Whether it's exercise, diet, or spiritual practices, boundaries help individuals stay committed to their goals and avoid slipping into unhealthy patterns. The chapter concludes by reminding readers that setting boundaries with oneself is an ongoing process that requires self-awareness, discipline, and compassion. The authors encourage readers to regularly evaluate their boundaries and make adjustments as needed to support personal growth and well-being. Chapter 13: Boundaries and God. This chapter explores the relationship between boundaries and spirituality, focusing on how individuals can set boundaries in their relationship with God. The authors address several important themes. Understanding God's boundaries. The authors explain that God has set boundaries in His relationship with humanity. These boundaries are reflected in the commandments and principles laid out in the Bible. Understanding and respecting these boundaries is essential for a healthy spiritual life. Accepting God's limits. The authors discuss the importance of accepting the limits that God has placed on human behavior. These limits are designed to protect individuals from harm and guide them toward a fulfilling life. Resisting or ignoring these boundaries can lead to spiritual and emotional distress. Setting boundaries in spiritual life. The authors encourage readers to set boundaries in their spiritual practices, such as regular prayer, worship, and study of the Scriptures. These boundaries help individuals stay connected to God and grow in their faith. Balancing faith and works. The chapter also addresses the balance between faith and works, emphasizing that while good works are important, they should not be pursued at the expense of one's relationship with God. Setting boundaries around spiritual activities ensures that they remain a source of joy and connection rather than a burden. Dealing with guilt and shame. Many people struggle with feelings of guilt and shame in their relationship with God, often due to past mistakes or unmet expectations. The authors encourage readers to set boundaries with these feelings, recognizing that God's grace and forgiveness are available to all who seek it. Listening to God's guidance. The authors emphasize the importance of setting boundaries that allow for quiet reflection and listening to God's guidance. This involves setting aside time for prayer and meditation, free from distractions and worldly concerns. The chapter concludes by reminding readers that a healthy relationship with God involves mutual respect for boundaries. By understanding and respecting God's boundaries, individuals can deepen their spiritual life and experience greater peace and fulfillment. Chapter 14: Resistance to Boundaries. This chapter explores the various forms of resistance that individuals may encounter when setting boundaries. The authors discuss both internal and external resistance and offer strategies for overcoming these challenges. Internal resistance. Many people struggle with internal resistance when setting boundaries, often due to fear, guilt, or a lack of confidence. The authors encourage readers to recognize these feelings as normal but not insurmountable. They suggest practical steps for overcoming internal resistance, such as affirming one's right to set boundaries and seeking support from trusted friends or a counselor. External resistance. External resistance comes from others who may be unhappy or threatened by the boundaries being set. This can include family members, friends, colleagues, or even authority figures. The authors advise readers to remain firm in their boundaries while also being compassionate and understanding of others' reactions. Clear communication and consistency are key to managing external resistance. Manipulation and guilt. One common form of external resistance is manipulation, where others use guilt, anger, or emotional appeals to pressure individuals into abandoning their boundaries. The authors provide strategies for recognizing and responding to manipulation, including staying calm, restating one's boundaries, and not engaging in arguments. Cultural and social pressures. The chapter also addresses cultural and social pressures that can make boundary setting difficult. This includes expectations around gender roles, family obligations, and social norms. The authors encourage readers to examine these pressures critically and determine whether they align with their values and well-being. Fear of conflict. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear conflict or confrontation. The authors emphasize that while conflict can be uncomfortable, it is often necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. They provide tips for handling conflict constructively, such as staying respectful, focusing on the issue at hand, and seeking compromise when possible. Building boundary support. The authors highlight the importance of building a support system to help maintain boundaries. This can include friends, family, or support groups who understand and respect one's boundaries. Having a strong support system can make it easier to stand firm in the face of resistance. The chapter concludes by encouraging readers to persevere in setting and maintaining boundaries, even when faced with resistance. The authors remind readers that boundaries are essential for a healthy, balanced life and that overcoming resistance is a crucial part of the process. Chapter 15. How to measure success with boundaries. This chapter focuses on how individuals can measure their success in setting and maintaining boundaries. The authors provide several criteria for evaluating progress. 1. Increased clarity. One sign of successful boundary setting is increased clarity about one's own needs, desires, and responsibilities. The authors suggest that individuals who are successfully setting boundaries will have a clearer sense of who they are and what they want from their relationships and life. 2. Improved relationships. Healthy boundaries often lead to improved relationships, as individuals learn to communicate more effectively and respect each other's limits. The authors encourage readers to assess whether their relationships have become more balanced, respectful, and fulfilling as a result of setting boundaries. 3. Reduce resentment. Setting boundaries can help reduce feelings of resentment, which often arise when individuals feel overwhelmed or taken advantage of. The authors advise readers to consider whether they feel less resentment and more peace in their interactions with others. 4. Greater sense of control. Successful boundary setting often results in a greater sense of control over one's life. The authors suggest that individuals who are setting effective boundaries will feel more empowered to make decisions and take responsibility for their actions. 5. Increase self-respect. Respecting one's own boundaries is a key component of self-respect. The authors encourage readers to evaluate whether they have developed a stronger sense of self-worth and confidence as they set and maintain boundaries. 6. Enhance well-being. Setting boundaries can lead to improved physical, emotional, and mental well-being. The authors recommend assessing whether boundary setting has led to better health, reduced stress, and a more balanced life. 7. Continued growth. Successful boundary setting is an ongoing process that requires continual growth and adjustment. The authors encourage readers to view boundary setting as a lifelong journey and to celebrate their progress while remaining open to further development. The chapter concludes by reminding readers that measuring success with boundaries is not about perfection but about progress. The authors encourage readers to be patient with themselves and to recognize that setting boundaries is a skill that takes time to develop. Chapter 16. A Day in a Life with Boundaries. The final chapter revisits the story of Sherry, the character introduced in Chapter 1, to illustrate how her life has changed after learning to set boundaries. The narrative shows Sherry navigating her day with newfound confidence and clarity, demonstrating the positive impact that boundaries have had on her life. Morning routine. Sherry begins her day with a sense of peace, having established a morning routine that allows her to start the day on her terms. She no longer feels rushed or overwhelmed, as she has set boundaries around her time and activities. Parenting. Sherry has learned to set boundaries with her children, which has led to a more harmonious household. She no longer feels guilty about enforcing rules and consequences, and her children have become more responsible and respectful as a result. Work-life balance. At work, Sherry has set clear boundaries with her boss and colleagues, allowing her to focus on her tasks without feeling overburdened. She no longer takes on more than she can handle and has learned to say no when necessary. Marriage. Sherry's marriage has also improved, as she has set boundaries with her husband, Walt. She no longer tolerates disrespect or control, and they have learned to communicate more openly and honestly. The relationship has become more balanced, with both partners taking responsibility for their actions and emotions. Friendships. Sherry has reevaluated her friendships and set boundaries with those who were draining her energy. She now surrounds herself with supportive and respectful friends, leading to more fulfilling and balanced relationships. Self-care. Sherry has made self-care a priority, setting boundaries that allow her to take time for herself without guilt. This has led to improved physical and emotional well-being, as she no longer feels exhausted or neglected. The chapter concludes with Sherry reflecting on the positive changes in her life and expressing gratitude for the journey of learning to set boundaries. She realizes that boundaries have not only improved her relationships and well-being but have also allowed her to live a more authentic and fulfilling life. The authors end the book with a message of encouragement, reminding readers that the process of setting boundaries is ongoing and requires patience, perseverance, and self-compassion. They emphasize that boundaries are a gift that allows individuals to take control of their lives, protect their well-being, and build healthy, loving relationships. Thank you for joining our quest for infinite growth. If you enjoyed this, please like and follow Infinite Self-Improvement on all social media and podcasts. We'll see you soon, but until then, remember that your potential is infinite.